So when we talk about productivity, when we talk about quality, there is a happy medium where I need to say, if I expect X in numbers and production in honey, then I need to take that down a notch and give them a buffer for quality.
Rising above the buzz of ultrasonic cleaners and the clanking of stainless steel are the ideas and voices that are changing an industry. You're listening to the Beyond Clean podcast, the central nexus for the people, processes, and products that are improving our sterile processing world. Each week, we speak with frontline technicians, CEOs, engineers, and entrepreneurs with a common goal to help you fight dirty. Every instrument, every time. Whether you are tuning in for education or inspiration, we're glad you did. Now turn on those washers and turn up the volume. It's time to go beyond clean.
This week, we speak with Garrett Hollembeak, Manager of Sterile Processing and Distribution for Cincinnati Children's. And we're going to be talking about quality, Hank, and I'll just let you go ahead and set the stage for how Garrett really got our attention.
Yeah, we'll get deeper into this, but the answer is bees. Bees, the bee's knees. It was bees that caught our attention. I'm a little afraid of bees, to be honest, Justin. I mean, I see them out there and I'm just like, oh, okay, get away. Especially like the real big ones. I guess maybe those are like hornets, but anything that can sting me, I'm afraid of. But these bees are going to be good bees that apply to what we do in sterile processing. The SPBs, if you want to be punny. So yeah, I can't wait to get into the show today.
Yeah, we'll figure out if this is a metaphor or an analogy in today's episode. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after a short break. I'm Justin Poulin.
And I'm Hank Balch.
From 17 Studios, you're listening to Beyond Clean, the global voice of sterile processing.
Joining us now is Garrett Hollembeak, Manager of Sterile Processing and Distribution for Cincinnati Children's, and we are going to be talking about quality and prerequisites for quality today, Garrett. And we'll get into what we mean by that here in a little bit, but I wanted to welcome you to the show. Thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me.
And so, Garrett, why don't you just talk about your background in sterile processing? And even if you want to share like an interesting tidbit, something like a pastime or something, your funniest experience from sterile processing.
Yeah, sure. So I've been in sterile processing for about 5 years now and worked and from third shift and as a lead tech and kind of bounced around in my roles. And my previous position was as an instrument coordinator. And so working a lot with instrument quality and making sure that's maintained. But one of the, I guess, most unique things I've experienced in SPD is I worked with a great tech on third shift, hearing some of his stories. And he had been a tech for, 30, 40 years and just had great experiences about, how things have changed and technology has changed. And so he shared about, and he was working at a different facility at the time, but, it was one of those, like everybody called off, snow coming down. And so he's building case now before DPCs were systematized. And so he had just tons of stuff. And what he found was that as he's pulling all these cases and everything, pretty much the whole OR had worked and gone for the day and he's still working. So he looks up at the clock and he sees it's like 4 hours past his shift. And I get a kick out of that because that's kind of how it is in SPD sometimes. Like you're focused, you're locked in and the whole world's moving on around you. But I get a kick out of that because that's just how he worked. So I think about that sometimes when you get locked into these activities.
I'm sure his manager loved that.
Right. When
it's like, who approved that 4 hours of overtime?
Hey, sorry, that's just working.
I just got locked in, boss.
Yeah. I was snowing outside, so.
I wasn't going anywhere anyway, so might as well get the cases done. Yeah, I love that. Yeah. That is true, though. That is a positive And then at times it can be a negative, but it does make the time go by quickly in sterile processing, especially like you get like laser focus and decontam, for instance, and you just get in a groove, but those hours can fly by. Bringing it into not really quality assurance yet, but the reason that you're on the show, how we found you, is the way that we find a lot of people out there. I just can't say it enough. If you want to get our attention, get active on LinkedIn and start creating value. And you did that. I think you actually had posted a comment and a couple of like insights or whatever on the topic of productivity. And it caught my eye. And I said, hey, if you'll write that up in like a full length, I'd love to publish that through Beyond Clean. And you did just that. But for folks who have not seen that productivity article, can you talk to us about what that is and kind of what your big takeaways were?
Yeah, thank you. So the article was about productivity and looking at it through two different lenses. So this is about a year ago. I was with my son, he's turning 4. I'll talk about him a lot. But so we were at Menards, which is like a hardware store, kind of like a Home Depot. And they had these beehives, and they look kind of odd next to the birdhouses, and they're mason beehives. And so I'd never seen those before, so I looked up, well, what's a mason bee? That's where I got the information of, well, they're great pollinators. They do their work totally differently than a honeybee, but they're really vital to the ecosystem. So people will see they'll put up these mason bee houses, and that way they've got a spot and they can just focus on doing their work. So that was about a year ago. So a few months ago, I moved into the role as a manager of sterile processing here. And when you look at a whole department, you start to see those different types of work. And you see, well, hey, we see the numbers for every employee, but this tech may have super high numbers, and this tech may have very different numbers, and it's two different types of workers. So that's where the thought of, all right, these are different kind of bees here. One that does high numbers, big productivity, and another who is just as engaged, just as active, but their forte is building quality. And the importance of recognizing both of those, I think, is key. So that's what kind of sparked the post and then the article after that.
So I gotta follow up on that, and the biggest thing is how do they work together, right? Like you can't have them only doing one role. Somehow, they have to, the quality has to catch the productivity to strike a nice balance, right? Like if you had everybody on third shift was quality, that might work on third shift, right? Might work on third shift.
Yep.
Not going to work on first shift. But I'm assuming that you need to have a nice mix, and the way that they work has to be in a certain type of concert where, each individual tray doesn't only get one type of worker.
Yep, absolutely. And that balance is, it affects the numbers, but it also affects the time. Because if you have somebody who's, taken 45 minutes to get through a simple tray, well, now we're getting lower quality. We're now having backlogs, and that's going to affect things negatively in their own way. So I think a big part of the balance comes from knowing what your department looks like. So as a lead tech, one of my primary things was again, capturing this productivity. So just, I guess, as a background thing, my background in epidemiology is as part of public health. So you're dealing with a lot of data and a lot of numbers. But I was also in the department. And so you have that observation, you have data on one hand, and then you have your observation. And marrying those two is important. So going to your question, how do you strike that balance between, your honeybee activities and your mason bee activities? And it comes to understanding that value stream. So if I know that a completed perfect tray, it's been, inspected under lighted magnification, we use the borescope on every lumen, insulation is perfect. Now that value of the tray, put a number on it. Well, anything less than that is now taking away from the value. So understanding the value stream from a department perspective helps you strike that balance.
It really put a pulse, or like you put your finger on the pulse of a lot of the frustration from the technician side, because we do feel that pressure of push, be a honeybee, give me honey. But then we're looking around and we're like, hey, if no one unloads the washers or the cart washer or like replaces all of the indicators at the assembly tables are like 100 million things that have to be done in order for one person to stay at their table and keep assembling, then the whole thing will crumble. I love the conversation. Like, I know it was just an introduction to the topic and the conversation, honestly, but I think it really prompted a lot of good conversation and feedback online, especially. And through reading it myself, I said, you know what? There's a quality component to this. You just kind of alluded to it, right? But just like with productivity, there's a lot of things that have to be done first in sterile processing in order to be able to produce a quality product or to make the honey, if we want to keep that analogy coming here. What are some of those ancillary activities? Obviously, like, we're talking the prerequisites of quality in this episode, talking about quality all season. So what are some of those activities that could be easy to miss at the leadership level or even the technician level if you're not thinking in these kind of categories?
Yeah, I think that's a great focus too, is what needs to happen first. Now, again, I'll reference, as an instrument coordinator, buying quality. There's a million different vendors out there. And when you see something come through the washer for the first time with rust spots, okay, there's something I need to investigate here. The value of a robust maintenance and refurbishing system, it's, you really can't put your number on it, but when that stuff doesn't get done, then you see the numbers creep up. Then you see minutes in the OR spent because the right instrument, broke down. So buying quality is a key. And then when we look at point of use, that's the other start. When everything in SPD, we're working on assurances that if I do my job right, we're going to have a sterile product at the end of this. We're going to achieve the vaunted, number that we want. Now, pre-treating in the OR, returning instruments to the correct set, and then wiping down. We had a tray that came down, not super great, but it was thoroughly sprayed. And so making that distinction between, well, I sprayed it, yeah, but you got to wipe it down, so understanding the mechanics of what pre-treating actually is. That's the starting point, is buying quality and then making sure point of use that instruments are really treated like as the valuable asset that they are.
I know, Justin, I saw your eyes light up when he said preventive maintenance and refurbishment, because that's been kind of your world, for the last couple of years too. I would not have even considered that as a prerequisite for quality. But Justin, how do you categorize that? Because it makes sense now that Garrett said that, hey, you got to buy the right instrument, but even before you start using the instrument, you need a program in place that the count has already started, that the process is already there to make sure that it stays at that high quality for a long period of time.
I think it's absolutely integral to the quality. And it's a partnership too, because the inspection kind of breaks down with that. The problem is the nice thing about preventive maintenance when it comes to stainless steel instruments and on-site, and off-site types of services is the person who's inspecting it that's their specialty. That's their singular role. Unfortunately, the technicians that are in the department that are trying to inspect for quality just don't have the same amount of time with each instrument. They don't necessarily only have one role. I mean, even as they're inspecting it, they still have to have competencies in all these other areas. And so you can kind of take all of those sterile processing competencies and then extrapolate it to a repair technician, and their competencies are actually on the very, micro level details of each instrument and the material compositions that are used and how you repair those material compositions. So it's just a more granular focus, but absolutely. And I've always said, here's something that a lot of places don't necessarily focus on as much. Like, Garrett, I'm sure you'll think this is a concern, but it's not the same level of concern as it might be for a repair company that's servicing your sets, but duplicate tray numbers. That you don't love it, but what headache does it cause you and your department if you have two major ortho number twos? Probably, you don't really know your inventory, but is it really going to cause somebody in the OR to come down and yell at you? Not directly. But for the repair company, if they just serviced one of the major ortho number twos and the other one has a quality issue and it looks like they just serviced it, well, that is a problem. And so yes, that does ultimately cause you a headache, but it's a lot less direct association for you than it might be for the repair company. And so, yeah, absolutely. And I think, PMIs of all kinds, there's equipment that is run through sterile processing, but maybe the PMs are taken care of by biomed. And so then what's the visibility interdepartmentally on that? And how much do we all live through pains and miscommunications or lack thereof between departments on that?
I know, Garrett, you mentioned earlier the value stream. And I think that's a very important concept. I don't know if we have all the time that's necessary to go into that, kind of teach me, because I've heard that phrase thrown out. And you just explained it in a way where I kind of finally started to understand. So I want to learn more about that. But maybe this next question can kind of get us there a little closer. In looking at these prerequisites for quality, how do leaders in the department and technicians keep a focus on them in order that they don't get devalued or forgotten about over time? Like, we get it right at the beginning, but then like what happens? We get busy, we get short-staffed. Like, how do you make sure that these kinds of things that you just said have to be done, stay getting done over the long haul?
Yeah, that's such a key thing, especially from a leadership standpoint, because you, and just me, I'm protective of my techs. It's these people are working their rear ends off. And, if you've ever been in decontam for day, it's hard. It's physical. Your techs are working hard, and they work hard because they care. So when you see techs and they're working as a leader, you have to give them a buffer. So when we talk about productivity, when we talk about quality, there is a happy medium where I need to say, if I expect X in numbers and production and in honey, then I need to take that down a notch and give them a buffer for quality. Just going back to your example, Justin, is those two trays that are labeled identically. Well, that means we need to correct that, and that's going to be a non-producing activity. The OR is never going to see that, but it's my job as a leader to say, hey, Bob, I need you to relabel this or find that tray that is duplicate, and we're going to take time. Now, I'm not going to get after Bob on his numbers if they're a little lower that day, because I know that I've built quality into that process. And so I think you have to be protective of your techs and not set expectations so high that you can't build that quality buffer in there.
What about having lead on the quality initiatives like that? I think that's where you run into trouble, right? So if you just designated some of the people that were really strong in that quality area to special projects that would never show productivity in terms of, especially, trays assembled, right? That's a common one. How would you handle that? Would they be part of that buffer, but it would be in the staffing model instead? And would that come back to haunt you?
Yeah, it's a good question, because there's a balance with that. If going back to your repair and refurbishing process, you have somebody who may take time out of their day. Now, do you make that the tech is going from their table to do that? Do you make that a lead tech responsibility where that's kind of baked into the cake? I think there's a good argument for both, provided that it fits into your staffing model. Now, for the instrument to instrument quality, it's not always going to be a project to say, hey, today we're checking every laparoscopic set. It has to be at that table, close at hand. Trying to remind myself not to talk too much about bees in this and to actually talk about sterile processing. But man, if you're a Mason and you go 20 miles, if you're going 20 miles to get to the nearest daisy, well, yeah, you're not going to have a good day. It has to be close. And we can have big projects that are, designated to say, I'm going to take something off your plate so that you can accomplish this. But then for the day-to-day quality, we have to make it as easy and convenient as possible for these techs who are already working incredibly hard.
You're singing my song now. That's what a leader is all about. Like, to make it easy for your technicians to do the right thing, to do the quality thing. And if you're doing that, then you're doing your job. That's great. Before we totally drop the bees, I do want to give a shout out to one of our Beyond Clean Advisory Group members, Cody Trout. I know he's a beekeeper. If there's other bee nerds out there, we'd love to know who you are and then take this bee conversation offline. Okay. Back to the interview here. It is. And there's a lot. I think those kind of metaphors and analogies from outside of the industry teach us so much. I'm so sick and tired of the airline one. We beat that one down. I still use it occasionally because it's a good one. But yeah, there's a lot more out there to learn and apply. So you brought up the concept of buffer. This is another one too. I just had not really thought about, or at least put into words before, that I think was really powerful. So I'm going to think some more about that concept, because I can see a leader that doesn't build in the buffer and is expecting those results at a certain rate is never going to get them, and they're not going to know why, because they're not building in the buffer that it takes to get the quality. That transitions or segues into how we encourage and equip our technicians with the tools and desire to want to spend the time on hardwiring all of these prerequisites in their day-to-day. Because you said buffer, I'm assuming that's the time, but what about the tools and desire? How do we get them to want to do these things?
And that goes straight to connecting patients to our processes. Prior to Sterile Processing, I worked as a state-tested nursing assistant, worked in both the hospital setting and then also long-term care. And so that was my background coming into SPD is purely patient care. And you're the person who's, walking them down the hall and, doing the day-to-day activities. So we have in our department what we call the Porter principle. So Porter is the name of my son. That's the lens. We work at a children's hospital. And so our standard is, if it's not good enough for my son, if it's not good enough for Porter, that's not good enough for anybody else. Anybody who goes up to the OR, it might be our nieces, nephews, grandbabies, children, neighbors. And that's part of being ingrained into your community. So it starts there. So you have a focus on the patient. And then everybody wants to do right by the patient. And then you get to your table and you have no lighted magnification. You don't have the indicators you need. You don't have the correct tools. And then you slowly become disengaged. It slowly becomes the feeling of, I can't provide the need for the patient, so I'm going to take a step back. And all of a sudden we see these mason bees start to fly a little slower. So as a leadership, you have to be arm in arm with your business partners. And you have to say, I need this because I need an insulation tester because the patient's going to get burned. I think Sharon is working with HealthMark has done a great job really bringing visibility to that issue. And then you can take that, and it's great that those resources are put out, because then I can go to my business partner and say, hey, this is research. This is stuff that's done. This is what I see with a high quality borescope. This is what I can see just on my own. And now the surgeon has what they need. Now we're seeing fewer infections. So it's the deep stuff. It's the stuff that you're not going to see the results tomorrow, but it's absolutely critical for patient safety.
Our theme of this season is investing in instrument safety, and you just outlined a lot of great places to put your time and your money, right? Because it's not all just about spending the money, but there is money that needs to be spent. How do you see all this conversation, right, that we've been talking about today, all these ancillary activities fitting in with that broader discussion of instrument safety?
I think a big piece is it's got to be planned. We all have bandwidth. And in the department, if we say, especially being new to my role, there's that, voice in the back of your head that says, everything's got to be perfect. You got to have the exact right setup. Every single thing has to be just right. And when we look at a team, we say, what's the bandwidth? What can I accomplish in this week? And so if you want to work on this key aspect of, let's say it's buying a higher quality of instrument. Let's say that's our goal for this fiscal year 23. Well, it needs to be planned. There needs to be deliverables, and it needs to fit in, when you delegate into a framework where somebody's not going home, just totally burnt at the end of the day because we put too much on their plate. Most issues in SPD get dealt with for years. So it's okay to take the time to long game it and make sure that it gets done.
Garrett, I got to tell you, just listening to you talk is like a window into how you strategically think. And I can just see how well you are a communicator back to the other departments, like the operating room. I bet you have lots of engagement, supply chain, and I bet they really understand what's going on in your department without you having to like really show them or tell them all these stories and details to try to continue to make your point. I got to tell you, it's impressive to just listen to you and how you think. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a platform here to help others. I guess where I'm going with that is I think you probably have a gift for getting other people to understand and to be understanding. And so I want you to share some of that here and really give the audience like one or two things, that you would want them to maybe like really have heard in this conversation, but what they could actually do with it. Right. So there's like some good messages, but how can they then take some of that messaging and do something literally tomorrow? Or if they're listening on their way into work, they could do something the minute they arrive.
Yeah, that's a key thing is we say it's not a real meeting unless you have an action item at the end of it. So there's got to be something you do. The thing that can be done in any department tomorrow is that praising and expressing gratitude for staff engagement. I guarantee in any department, there's that one tech who restocks your integrators, and there's that one tech that always empties your 4x4. So taking the time, I work for a great hospital. We have e-cards that you can send somebody. The times that somebody feels noticed by that, feels seen and kind of understood, that's one thing that can be done tomorrow is you identify staff and say, thank you for doing that. Because I know that without you doing that, everything else would be a whole lot harder. I know the first educator I worked with as a tech, we had just a rough week and a lot of trays piled up when we got them through. And she sent me a thank you card. And as a new tech, boy, that means the world to you. It means the world to me as if I get a thank you note today and it says, I'm feeling seen, my work is being noticed. Now, long term, what can be done to actually build in these quality steps? And that's setting metrics with a buffer. So I can look at a honeybee worker and say, they produce so much. Now I'm going to learn from them and see what they're doing right. But I'm also going to understand that there's trigger points with productivity where I know that if somebody is doing, fourfold what another tech is, as a leader, that's a trigger point to me to say, well, are we achieving quality? And then actually going in and doing those observations, seeing them put a tray together, checking that the installation is tested, checking that we're using the tools we already have in place. So those are the short-term gratitude makes a world of difference. And then long-term observations to make sure that our numbers are meeting up with the quality we want.
That's great, Garrett. Okay. Last off the topic question, just out of curiosity for myself, I heard you say you had a background in epidemiology and we didn't really explore that. We jumped right into the bee analogy, not
Sure.
a metaphor, as I might have said before. I wonder if there was something that you learned in epidemiology that shaped the way that you view sterile processing, just out of curiosity.
Yeah, absolutely. So my program is public health. And so, there's a lot of community planning and implementation, programming and implementation, and then epidemiology. Those were kind of the three branches that I emphasized in my major. So epidemiology, you look at, well, where did the problem first occur? They use a metaphor of a well that's getting everybody sick. So then SPD, you're doing a root cause analysis, and then you contain that. So whether that's recalling a load, whether that's seeing how far the issue spread, and then really looking at it from a data perspective. So getting hands-on experience with Excel and SPD, it carried over really well. I'd just say best career tool is Excel and LinkedIn, right? I'll give a shout out there. So yeah, that really informed my perspective in SPD. And I've gone through the program. So I've worked while I've been in school and you pluck out these tools and say, today I'm going to figure out how to determine spread of an issue. And this is how I'm going to put numbers to this type of process. And so that data approach was really informed by, my education and then applying it in SPD.
Phenomenal. Phenomenal. Well, Garrett, you did a great job with this interview. Really enjoyed the conversation today and can't thank you enough for coming on.
Thank you. This was, like I said in the beginning, this was a career goal for me. So I'm honored to be on the podcast. I'm honored to work with people who are putting out the kind of content that changes how we do our jobs. Thank you.
That was Garrett Hollembeak, manager of sterile processing and distribution for Cincinnati Children's. And Hank, super impressive conversation. And we were kind of talking at the end, and I love transferable skills. It's a big theme of mine. What are you bringing from the other experiences in your professional or personal lives that can really benefit your organization? It's what makes us all unique. It brings different perspectives to the table. And you could really hear as we were talking through that he is somebody I think that can really get the attention of the other departments. But there was this little nugget at the end. And he's right. Epidemiologists absolutely do a lot of data mining. And that is a transferable skill that is not only a really good one to have, it's going to become a necessity. And so being skilled in that area so that when you do engage those other folks from other departments, that not only do you have the personality to get them to sort of understand what's going on and where the changes need to happen, and that there's a process for doing root cause analysis and tying it, but the fact that you can then back that up with the data that might actually not only get other department leaders to understand, but to get involved. That's how an organization really starts to do fundamental change.
Everybody understands that we have a deficit of data in sterile processing, a dearth, if you will. We just do not have enough of it. If you come across the opportunity to gather data creatively, outside of just the instrument flow itself, but all these ancillary things that we talked to Garrett about today, I mean, there's really a lot of power to improve the process across the board, quality, productivity, even something as random as employee morale. Like data can impact those kinds of things if you have it and if they're put in the right hands with the right mind looking at them and kind of thinking through them. Tremendous conversation. I hope it sparks a lot of folks out there to dig into the data further and to reach out to Garrett and talk offline, bring these kind of concepts to your department and make an improvement.
All right. Well, that's going to do it for this week's show. But as a reminder, you can help support Beyond Clean by subscribing on Apple, Amazon, or Google Podcasts. We're also available on Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or search for Beyond Clean on your favorite podcast application. There's bonus content for some episodes, but you can't access it unless you download the smartphone app for iPhone or Android. And while you're there, we'd love a rating and a review because we really appreciate your feedback. And speaking of feedback, if you do have any future guests or topics you'd like to recommend or just general insight into how you're enjoying the podcast, send an email to info@beyondclean.net. On behalf of Hank and myself, thanks for listening to this week's episode of Beyond Clean.